Welcome in SEC baseball fans of Monty that are just finding the SEC for the first time. Excited to have our first deep dive preview on all the SEC schools that we're having. We're going to be going in alphabetical order, ranking the teams, ranking some stuff out of the teams, such as stadiums, jerseys, and aesthetics. And it starts off at the top with the University of Alabama. Alabama, if you remember correctly, this was in their second year with Coach Rob Vaughn. He was at Maryland before that. He won a few Big Ten titles there before Alabama kind of convinced him to come down south. Last year was a pretty good year for Alabama. They went 33-24, which was good for seventh in the SEC according to the tournament rankings. They finished at 17-13 with wins over Tennessee, South Carolina, Arkansas, and LSU. They were 22-9 in the SEC and were really one of the best teams at home in the SEC, as I believe Texas A&M was one of the only ones to go in there and win a series. The downfall of Alabama was obviously their ability to not steal games. They got swept a ton, and it was really kind of what held this team back. Moving on, like we said, they play at Sewell Thomas Stadium. How we're going to be doing these rankings is we're kind of going to release them as we do the preview show. So as of right this second, Sewell Thomas Stadium is one of one. They redid it back in 2016, added some great aesthetics out there in right field. I know that the crowds are sometimes sparse by SEC standards, but I think that this one's going to end up being kind of a middle of the road SEC stadium, as there are a few that are better than it, and there are a few that are worse than it. Moving on into kind of more of a uniform sense, Alabama, again, one of one. This is kind of their four primary looks with a road gray and a camo hat, a red jersey with just Bama across, a pinstripe with the Alabama A, and then that script Alabama. If I'm going to be honest with you, these are not kind of some of my favorite looks. I really don't enjoy the block lettering. But again, I think if they kind of lean into that script a little bit, it will go a long way for the Crimson Tide. Again, as we kind of move on and go through these, it's going to be where we get these rankings. I think Alabama is going to kind of end up being near the bottom, unfortunately. Moving on into their SEC slate, this is what we know so far as their full schedule isn't out. The Jacksonville Classic, as they're going to be facing Coastal Carolina, NC State, and Ohio State down there in Jacksonville. That is where their big rival Auburn went down there, really kind of dominated that one. It was kind of a quote-unquote coming out party, but it was not for more things to come as they really struggled. Alabama obviously went to Frisco last year and played some really good competition there. Had a ton of guys on that all-tournament team. When their schedule kind of releases, I imagine that the Jacksonville Classic is going to be their headliner and their top one. I don't really foresee them playing a ton of tough competition. But the good news is in SEC play, they are going to play a bunch of tough competition. They did get that kind of weird thing where they play more home series than road series. They are going to open up with Texas A&M at Texas A&M, obviously the team that finished second, likely going to be sitting at least in the top three in our preseason poll and in our SEC rankings. I know that I have them slotted at number 2. Tennessee, the defending national championship, they will get at home. Again, Tennessee kind of gave them some fits last year. They kind of stole that series as Tennessee beat them on Friday night and Alabama kind of put them to sleep, winning it on Saturday and Sunday. So they'll kind of look to continue that. Newcomer in the SEC, Oklahoma, will make their first trip to Alabama in that third week of the year. Oklahoma, I think, is going to surprise a lot of people. This will be a good kind of proving ground. That big rivalry is they'll go at Auburn and Plainsman Park there in week 4. Then from there, they'll head to Mississippi State, which they get at home. But with Alabama and Mississippi State kind of being so close, I know a ton of Mississippi State fans that love to kind of go and take over that stadium. From there, they'll head over to Alex Box, which, again, is always kind of a tough place to play in the SEC. One of the most formidable forces. And again, that kind of tends to be a tough place to LSU in that weekend. Missouri, they'll get at home. Missouri, I think, will be a little bit more competitive as that'll be another SEC series. And then their big 3 down the stretch and their quote-unquote old SEC East foes. They'll go at Vandy, home against Georgia, and then at Florida. So, again, I think that it's a really, really tough SEC slate. But every weekend in the SEC, I think, is going to be a very, very tough slate. Alabama, obviously, is going to be replacing a ton of talent. This is kind of how modern college baseball, I think, is built. Gage Miller, second team All-American, hit 381 with 12 doubles. Ian Pertz hit second for them in their final game, 351 in SEC play with 6 home runs. Will Hamler came on to start 12 games late, hitting that 4-hole again in their final regional. Let me see if I can actually kind of blow that up just so you can see it a little bit easier, and you can't. So a little technical difficulties. I'll kind of fix that on the next one when we go in and through this. That is going to be how I kind of decide how much they're actually replacing, is how many of their guys started in their regionals. If they made regionals, if they didn't make regionals like Ole Miss and Missouri, we will be taking just their last games and then obviously the innings of it. So again, TJ McCants is another one. He was a big transfer over from Alabama. Mac Gousset was their catcher last year. He was a senior leader for them, finalist for the Buster Posey Catcher of the Year. He hit 321 for them. Bryce Eblin, who missed a month due to an injury, hit 268, is another guy that they're going to be replacing. And then they are going to be replacing their Friday night guy in Greg Ferrone, as well as Ben Hess. So there is a lot that Alabama is going to be replacing on the side. And I think that, again, last year's team was a really older team. It was a lot of kind of holdovers as it was Rob Vaughn's first year. I think that a lot of the guys that they have in have really bought into Rob Vaughn's system. And again, but they're going to be replacing a bunch of stalwarts. As Gage Miller, it felt like, was at Alabama forever. He started for them a ton. That's going to be a big bat. The maturity of TJ McCants, I think, is going to be another one that gets really, really missed. Matt Gousset, again, is another one that will be missed. But, I mean, they brought in a ton of talent from a transfer portal sense as we kind of move on into that aspect of it. Again, we are going to be ranking their pitchers going forward. So these are the 3 guys that I kind of project to be their starters going forward. Zane Adams, he was a midweek guy who got promoted into being their Saturday guy. He pitched in that loss against Stetson in the regional and pitched a ton for them down the stretch. Alabama also will be getting back Hagen Banks. He was a weekend guy, was injured. The reports that I saw, I don't think he's throwing yet. Back in March, Rob Vaughn said that it wasn't a tear by anything. So they expect him to be back in January, and I believe that is the timeline coming out of it. I don't think he's had any complications in that aspect going forward. I think Hagen Banks is going to be a guy that can really, really be a big key for Alabama going forward. I think he kind of slots in as a Sunday guy that they kind of use sparingly early. And then also Aiden Finateri coming over from Georgia Tech, I think is a very, very big arm as he pitched a ton of innings for that Georgia Tech staff. Again, you get a guy with Power 5 experience, I think is going to go a long, long way. I expect him to push Zane Adams to be either in that Friday or Saturday role. And then again, from there, it's the SEC. They're going to have a ton of bullpen guys. I really couldn't find a ton on fall reports from their pitching staff, but I expect these pitchers to be 3 guys that Alabama leans on, and I expect it to be a strength of this team. Moving right along, like I said, this is going to be SEC teams ranked. So as we kind of come out with these things going forward, we're going to have more teams that we rank. Alabama right now, they sit at number 1, 1 of 1, if you will. So again, as we kind of move along with this rankings, we'll have to see where Alabama kind of slots in that aspect. Projected lineup that I have from them, I think let's start off with the obvious ones. Brady Neal's coming over from LSU. He hit 276 for them, really took a ton of steps forward this year as he really kind of struggled against SEC play. Was in and out of the lineup for that LSU team. They put him at catcher. They put him in the outfield for a little bit before they got that there. They had him as a DH for a little bit. Brady Neal's a guy that comes over. I think that a change of scenery will be really, really good for Alabama. He'll have some familiar foes that he's seen before. But again, I think the big question with Brady Neal is, can he continue to progress in SEC play? He's always been a guy that really, really hits that mid-major pitching extremely, extremely well. His freshman year, like I said, he really struggled as he went 0 for 30. But again, last year he was a really consistent bat for that LSU force. And again, I think that this is kind of going to be a good start for him. Will Hodo is another guy that's who's doing a lot of their media stuff, so I assume that he's probably going to be their middle of the order guy. He's a senior coming bat at 263, 12 home runs, 12 doubles, 11 home runs, 38 RBIs. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be a big, big leader. And then Justin LeBron, I think that he's going to be the shortstop. He started every game last year for them at shortstop except for one where he played center field. Was really in the running to be a freshman player of the year in the SEC. He was kind of in that group with Gavin Grahovic and then Gackle over at Arkansas. He was a national first team All-American from a freshman, first team freshman All SEC. Probably one of the best talents that Alabama's had in a tremendous, tremendous long time. As I think in that 2026 draft, he's going to hear his name called in that first round. And it's been a good amount of time, I think, since Alabama's had a guy that's had this much talent. From there, I think that those are the three that you can kind of go ahead and, Sharpie in to be the starters. There are a few guys around that you can kind of also kind of count on. I think that it's the big battles, I think, are going to be in the infield, as they have obviously Justin LeBron's going to be the starter. So they have three guys for two spots. They're looking for a second baseman and they're looking for a third baseman. Jason Torres is coming over from Miami. He played third a ton at Miami, could really, really hit the ball well, started 39 games for them, hit over 331. A lot of the scouts that I've kind of talked to have him going as a really, really high projection pick. And he's somebody that I think is going to be tremendous in starting for them going forward. And then from there, Garrett Stanton is coming over from Sanford. So right there in Alabama. And then Brennan Norton is coming over from Jacksonville State. Both of these guys are almost completely different things. That's kind of the one thing that you have to watch as they kind of compete for one another. Brennan Norton can play third and Torres can play second, or Torres can play third and Garrett Stanton can play second. Again, Brennan Norton hitting that 3-hole for Jackson State, had 13 home runs, 44 RBIs, was really kind of their best hitter out of that aspect. There is a lot to like from them, but unfortunately, I think he is kind of going to be the odd man out, as Garrett Stanton has a professional approach. He really kind of sprays the ball all over the field. And again, that leaves Torres to play third. And he again, is one of the best fielders transfers, I think, in the country. And it's going to be really, really exciting to kind of see how they do that. Moving on to the outfield, Andre Mondungo is a freshman coming over. Huge. He played third base in college, but I kind of think that they're going to use his bat and move him into either a DH spot or a corner outfield spot. He's a 6'5", 60 guy with plus power. Like I said, he's a JUCO guy that many thought, he's 6'5". I'm getting kind of my notes here a little mixed up. Let me start over. Andre Mondungo is a 6'5" third baseman that's coming over with plus bat, and that's going to be something that they move him to a corner spot, I think, to get his bat in the lineup. There's a ton to like there when I've seen some of the perfect game film on him. He sprays the ball all over the field. And then next up in center field is the guy, again, that I think we can kind of assume is going to be that center fielder. Richard Bonallo is a JUCO guy. A few people thought he was going to be drafted and maybe not end up at Alabama. He hit 449 for them in 65 games, had 43 stolen bases from them, is really kind of a top of the lineup kind of guy. I expect him to either bat in that leadoff spot or maybe as a ninth guy to kind of trend it over. He's going to provide great defense in center field. And again, I think he's going to fit into that Rob Vaughn mold of guys that love to take that extra base. This is where I think things get a little bit tricky for Alabama. Coleman Mizell is a guy that was really, really highly recruited as a freshman. Hit 130 for him, 6'5", 60 guys, so he can play in center field. He homered and has had a tremendous fall, and I think he's really kind of pushing hard for playing time. It wouldn't surprise me to see kind of him in that lineup, but again, Alabama is a team that has tremendous talent, and the best are going to be on that field. Caden Snell is another guy. He started 36 games for them as a DH last year, hitting 324 with 6 home runs and 30 RBIs. He's also somewhat of their midweek pitcher, so I think that that's going to be somebody that they use as a DH. They could use Will Hodo as a DH as well, and then they have other people kind of move around there. I think that there's a lot of versatility in this lineup. Mason Sweeney's another guy to kind of watch a little bit as he DH'd. He was the number 1 player in Alabama in the class of 2022, so he's going into his junior year. Has been a little bit of a disappointment, but again, I think he's starting to turn a corner, and a lot of the stuff that I've read out of their fall ball stuff looks very promising. And I think Alabama could kind of surprise a few people with this lineup. Obviously, I think the strength is going to be in that pitching rotation, as those top three guys, I think, were one of the better ones that people will see in weekends in the SEC. And the depth that they have in that weekend rotation, I think is going to pay a lot of big dividends. As there's, if they can figure out the Hagen Bakes injury and how much he can kind of get stretched out, Alabama, I think, has the ability to kind of shorten some of these games going forward. Here's what we have for the bell curve on Alabama going forward. Obviously, I think that their bottom end is 2023 Auburn. It's a thing where if things don't go the way that they're supposed to, it could really kind of unravel and get out of control quickly. I think that they have a ton of talent like that 2023 team. They hit the ball like that 2023 team. They have, I think, a little bit more depth out of that 2023 team. But again, they have a few transfers that I think could kind of take big steps forward. They have a guys that were highly, highly, highly recruited that have kind of flown under the radar and not lived up to the hype per se, that could really kind of take steps back for them. But again, I think that their ceiling and their top end on the flip side of that is a super regional. I think that they're a team that could be very, very pesky. They're going to come battle tested out of that SEC. I don't think that they have that fourth bullpen or a starter to kind of press in a super regional. And I know that's only 3 games, but you really kind of do need a 4 starter in case things go bad. I think the lineup is good enough to get them into a super regional, but that's where I have them at their ceiling, is in that super regional. Ultimately, what I think is going to happen is they're going to be one of those quote unquote road SEC tournament teams that are in that 9 to 16 range. If you remember correctly, all 16 teams are going to make that SEC tournament. I think that there'll be a 3 seed somewhere in an ACC regional or a Big Ten or maybe a mid-major Big 12, and they're going to really kind of press and give them hell in that regional. I do see them being a little bit pesky, but I think that the average, if you're going to make me pick, is going to be in that regional championship, regional semifinal, that aspect, and getting bounced there. That's all we have for our SEC previews. Ultimately, Monty's going to cut these up and clip these up. If there's any questions or anything that come up, just feel free to quote it, and I'll answer any questions about Alabama. There's a ton to like about this team going forward. I think Justin LeBron has the ability to be a all SEC type of player. I think he could be a first-team SEC shortstop, which, again, is a very, very competitive position in the SEC going forward. I think Will Hodo is a guy that could be a second team. And again, I think Andre Mondungo, if I do mispronounce your name, I'm going to wait for a pronunciation guide. I think he's a guy, too, that could be an SEC all freshman of the year type of candidate. The power is there, and SEC voters love to have power. He reminds me a ton of almost like a Jay Slavolette from a height standpoint, is he doesn't really look awkward in that 6'5" frame. He looks like he's a lot smaller from a height standpoint in a very, very good way. And I think there's a lot to like about this Alabama team. And again, Rob Vaughn's an experienced guy. He's a guy that knows how to get the most out of his guys. Matt Shaw is somebody that he had drafted. Nick Madrigal a few years back from Maryland's a guy that he had drafted. He's a guy that knows how to get those under-the-radar recruits out of it going forward. And again, before we do that, one more thing as we kind of look forward and see where the program trajectory for this Alabama team is. They do rank in the top 25 recruiting in Perfect Game. I think it's their highest rating since we've been doing this. So I know that that's a smaller sample size in only 4 years. But again, there's a lot of guys that I really, really like. Ahmad Duff, Sean Griggs, Jackson Hunter, just to name a few names, are guys that I think could be starters down the road for this Alabama team. And again, they're already one of those teams that utilizes the portal in a good way. So you know the guys that are in that Sun Belt, the guys that are in that Southland Conference, those kind of guys, if they succeed in their first team all Southland, Rob Vaughn has no problem bringing those guys in. They recruit the state of Alabama tremendously well. I think it's a state that's very underrated from a baseball standpoint. Obviously, Gunnar Henderson's from the state of Alabama. There's a ton of baseball talent in the state of Alabama. And I think Rob Vaughn's kind of shutting off Alabama. And maybe you could kind of see them going on a little bit of a run here. But again, I really like the state that Rob Vaughn has this program in. And I'm excited to kind of see where they go from here. I believe that that's all we have time for here, as I know that we kind of rushed through it as it was 20 minutes on the dot. I wanted to kind of try and keep it under 20 minutes. Our next show is going to be Arkansas. Obviously, they're going to be a very polarizing team going forward. I'll be sure to get the graphics out tomorrow. But again, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. going forward, except for Christmas, because Christmas is on a Wednesday. We are going to be live talking about SEC ones. I haven't decided where I'm going to double up on those. We might do some Sunday specials down the road, but I'll be sure to post about the next one as this one comes out. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see y'all next Wednesday.